Hey everybody. So it's Tuesday night, March the 6th, and this Friday, or 6th, 7th, 8th, yeah, this Friday, the new A Wrinkle in Time movie is going to open everywhere. I think it's opening in nearly every city. It's opening in Nashville this Friday. But I literally just got home from a screening of the film, an early preview. There were some other media folks there, and there was also, it was one of those things where they've also got, coupons or passes that are being given out across the city. So it was pretty full house. Not a lot of kids there, which is interesting because generally speaking, I think the audience was pretty into it, but it's definitely what I would consider to be a kids movie, and we can talk about that a little bit more. Anyway, so a couple weeks ago, I did one of these instant first impression reviews about the Black Panther film. And a lot of you saw that and a lot of you commented about it. And I know that I post lots of stuff about me playing music or me, getting all worked up and silly talking about martial arts and stuff like that. But since so many people were interested in that review, I thought you guys might want to see this one as well. So, A Wrinkle in Time, of course, is based on the book by Madeleine L'Engle. And that's a book that I read when I was a kid. So, when I was in elementary school, that was a time when I discovered I was a big reader anyway. I was always reading books when I was growing up. And during that time, probably when I was in fourth and fifth grade, let's say, I was reading like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe books, reading The Hobbit, Tolkien. I don't know if I read Lord of the Rings that early, but around that time I was also introduced to A Wrinkle in Time, and it had like a Pegasus on the cover or something like that. So I was sold on it. And the only thing I really remember about that book was ultimately that the book was not really it was a different feeling. It really felt a little bit more like a science fiction kind of a book than a straight up fantasy, medieval sort of tale like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe feels like, or like The Hobbit feels like, for instance. But I remember enjoying the book. But that said, this is a movie review, not a book review. And thankfully for me, being somebody who isn't going to be disappointed by the movie because of the book, I really don't remember anything about the book. I just remember that it sort of fit into that genre, and I read it at that time, and that was like the first and only time I read that book. So I'm sure it's very good, but it just at that time for me it was a little bit off from what I was really into, and so it didn't stick with me as it has with other people. So I know the book is a classic, and I remember enjoying it, but I can't really compare the book and the film. So I like to do these things without spoilers as much as I can. Basically, this is a story about a girl who loses her father through a mishap of experimental science, and she's never convinced that they've lost him for good. Her family's kind of holding on. She has a younger brother who's adopted, and so it's her and her mom and her brother are all sort of hoping without hope, that they'll one day be reunited with their father. The mother is also a scientist. Her and the father, met working on, these experiments together. They shared a passion for trying to unlock the mysteries of the universe. So that's basically where the story picks up. And Chris Pine, who nowadays, the generation of teenagers, when I was, in my early, my preteens, I suppose, I discovered William Shatner as Captain Kirk on the original Star Trek series. It was in repeats from the '60s when I was that age. But of course, I loved it, and there were lots of toys and stuff of that era. But nowadays, kids growing up that same age, they think of Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, and I thought it was kind of interesting for him to play the father, to play this space scientist, who's lost out in the cosmos somewhere. I thought that was pretty good casting, just for the sort of cinema culture reference alone. And he does a good job. He does a good job. Generally, the actors are good. The young girl who plays Meg, who's the protagonist of the film, she is played by a girl named Storm Reed, I think is what her name was. I haven't seen her in anything before, but she does a very good job. She's in a whole lot of this movie. There's not much of this movie that she isn't in, and that's a lot to ask of a little kid. But she does a very good job. She does a very good job, and generally speaking, she's written pretty well, and her dad's written pretty well. But I would say that the movie has trouble with its writing. There are certain scenes that sort of like build in a certain direction, and then they feel like they just stop, and then the movie continues to another scene, and you're just sort of like, what's going on here? And it'd be hard. I need to look back again and see what was bothering me about those moments. Was there actually something that didn't make sense, or was it more like a tone thing, like an abrupt change of tone, or did the pacing get weird? Maybe it was even just an editing thing. But there's moments for sure where it feels like the script is off, and that like I say, the movie sort of starts off with this, dad's gone, the family's struggling on, this is what the struggle looks like. And then suddenly, this sort of solution begins to appear. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense how that's actually going on. I mean, it makes enough sense that I feel like I understand it, but it doesn't feel, it feels like a moment of bad storytelling at that point, you gotta get me into this thing. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes with this kind of film. Like you are called upon to suspend your disbelief to some degree, and you should want to. I'm all in favor. I don't go into movies hoping I don't like them. I always hope that I will like them. I'm going to be here for a couple of hours. I hope I enjoy this. But there's definitely problems with the way this is written, and there's really, I mean, if anything, one thing I would say is that strength about the weaknesses of this movie, which is interesting because later on there's a whole theme about how our faults are what make us special and strong. But the faults of the script, are not the end of the world, in the sense that that I feel like in a movie like this, it'd be really easy to go the other direction and to over-explain everything, and to have a lot of really awkward exposition and things like that. So in a way, the sin that's being committed isn't the greatest kind of sin. The sin of telling me too much is a way bigger sin than the sin of confusing me a little bit and feeling like there's chunks missing in the story. Like you got to get me here, and preferably you get me here in some kind of really unique way that I can get caught up in. You know what I mean? It's on you to sort of suspend your disbelief when you're watching a fantasy film or a sci-fi film. But it's also on the director and the writers and the actors and everybody involved in the whole mise en scene. The whole picture before your eyes moving and making noises. That's ultimately supposed to sort of, especially in a film like this, it's supposed to make you believe it. It's supposed to make you believe it enough so you can give yourself over to this crazy adventure, just like the protagonists do. And I felt like there was things about the script, in terms of the way the plot unfolded and stuff. Like there's times where it just felt like we needed another scene in here to sort of get us there, and that would take, you have to figure out how to do that, but there was, more than one time where it felt like things suddenly lurched forward in this kind of awkward way, and maybe some of that could be direction, I wanted to say one other thing about the other thing I would say about the script, let me just try to stick with that for a minute, is that the characters are, not really that greatly written. I do think mostly the dad's well written. I think mostly that Meg is well written. To some degree, I'd say her brother is well written. Her younger brother is played by an actor named, I'm not going to remember it now. Derek McCabe. And I've never seen this kid in anything. And in the movie, he's supposed to be about 5, and he may be a little bit older than that. Maybe he's like a really a really little 7-year-old or something. But boy, oh boy, this kid's something else. He really he kind of steals the movie, frankly. I would say that Storm, Meg, she definitely holds on to it. You know, you don't come back to the heroine and feel like, oh, this jerk again. You know, you do stick with her through her story for sure, and she's really good. She does a very fine job. But man, oh man, that little Derek can chew the scenery when he wants to. So he really goes for it. He's got a character with a whole lot of, I mean, he's just basically, you know, he basically just gets all the best stuff through the whole movie in terms of just being the little attention grabber through the whole thing, and not in an annoying way. I mean, this kid, I mean, he does a lot. He's kind of all over the place. He's kind of like the adorable little kid, the loving little brother, the a whole bunch of other stuff. I can't tell you a whole lot more, but he goes through a whole crazy character arc, and he's just a little pint-sized child. So hats off to Derek McCabe. I really, you know, I would say he's probably the best acting surprise in it. One acting surprise that I didn't have was from Oprah Winfrey. Oprah, there's like basically like these three sort of elemental witches essentially, who sort of recruit the kids to help them in this adventure that they need to go on, and they think that it's all connected to their dad in some way. So they sort of team up to achieve their mutual ends. And Oprah is sort of like the head honcho of these sort of spirit entities, and she's actually in Witch, right? Miss Witch, right? But it's Wich, right? There's Miss Witch, Miss What's It, and Miss Who. Oprah is just such a great actress that I don't know if it's that she's that well written. I mean, probably not. I bet you she's not that well written, but she just brings. She's such a good actress, man. If you guys don't appreciate Oprah as an actress because she hasn't made a lot of movies in a long time, you should go back and watch Oprah's movies because she's fucking awesome, man. She's very good actress, and she's very good in this. And the other two, Miss Whatsit is played by Reese Witherspoon, and Miss Who is played by, man, I almost had Mandy Kaling, I think is how you say her last name. The girl who was in The Office. So she's done a bunch of other stuff. She's got her own show, right? I can't remember the name of that show. Kim something? But anyway, so she's doing a million things and making her own TV shows and stuff nowadays. But now she's also in this movie. And she and Reese, it's weird because this is where I think the script sort of lets them down a bit, because Reese Witherspoon's thing is like, it's just this sort of running joke about her being sort of insensitive to human feelings in a way, because she sort of doesn't know what that really is. She's not a person, you know, she's this greater spirit being of some kind. But she's kind of bossy and insensitive. Then Mandy, her whole thing, Miss Who, right? Who? Maybe it should be whom, I wonder. Maybe it is whom. Maybe I heard it wrong. But anyway, she's basically always, she sort of like doesn't share any ideas or thoughts of her own, really. Every time somebody confronts her with a question or she has something to add to the conversation, it's always in the form of a quote of someone else, right? So it's all who's with her. And that honestly runs really thin, really fast, you know, and I don't know, maybe the little quotes could be better quotes or maybe they could be less obvious quotes in some way. I don't know, but I just think that, you know, I think it's an instance where I'm happy to just say this is not very well written for these actresses, and that given a better script, they might have been able to do better with it, you know, but it's pretty, you know, they're definitely a special part of the whole plot, these three ladies, and it's too bad. I mean, like they're like the poster basically for the movie, and it's too bad that doesn't work better. And there's another problem in that part of the film, which is that like their costumes and things they're wearing, you just want them to be a lot more unique and special, and just I don't know, just kind of everything about them. They're just sort of silly in a weird way, and kind of, I don't know, man. They just don't. They're not enough, right? And those sort of under realized, you know, costumes. are sort of one symptom of a bigger problem, which is like the whole production here um, uh, is underwhelming, and it's a movie that's supposed to be overwhelming in that regard, right? My wife made an interesting point because she said, because I started saying, I started basically blaming the director, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But my wife made the interesting point of saying like, well, maybe maybe it wasn't the director's limits, maybe it was the budget's limits, right? Maybe Disney's not willing to put Avengers money behind a movie aimed at like 9-year-old girls, right? Maybe. I think that's a bad mistake if that's the case, though, because I think this is an intergenerational book. I think there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of Gen X people who are going to be going to that. I would say maybe even a certain amount of a boomer crowd, because I'm not even sure when this book came out, but I want to say this book came out in like the 60s. So I think that there's a first generation of who love this book, who are still with us and still going to movies and still on top of what's happening with pop culture, and so I could see this book having this movie having a potentially much bigger audience of book people who love the book, coming to it. I mean, they wouldn't have made it if they didn't think they were going to get those audiences, but it, I would hate to think they didn't put the money behind it to make it a sci-fi fantasy spectacular, right? There's tons of special effects in the movie, but at the same time, somehow it ends up feeling like not, there's all sorts of scenes, for instance, where it feels like they're just like in Nebraska. They feel like they're like in like a tuned up Nebraska, like they're just like in wheat fields in this like flat western terrain with like a blue sky, and it's all cranked a little bit. The sky's like way blue, and the wheat is like literally glowing, and things like that. But it's still them standing in a wheat field or something. And so I just feel like there's a lack of imagination in a lot of this production design. These dresses just sort of seem sort of silly and kind of funny maybe or something, but it's like, it feels like they should be more than that. It feels like it should be bigger and bolder and, again, more imaginative, really, I mean, really more psychedelic, really. That's what we were sort of hoping for. I was wondering if it was going to be in 3D because my wife always likes to see these kinds of movies in 3D, and she had heard she had read a review where somebody was like literally using the word psychedelic to talk about the scenes when the kids are away from Earth. I won't say a whole lot more than that, but and that's if that's a spoiler for you, then this whole thing's probably a spoiler. But in these otherworldly realms that they discover in the movie, shouldn't they be otherworldly, and they just don't feel that way enough. There are moments and there are certain elements that are pretty good, but then there's other stuff that just feels, I mean, it really feels just sort of unfinished in a weird way. It also feels a bit like Avatar to me, and I wasn't that big of a fan of this aspect of Avatar, which is like, a lot of times it's just like, I just don't care for the design. You know what I mean? A lot of the stuff in Avatar to me just looks fucking silly. It just looks like silly cartoon world or something. It doesn't look like believable place to me at all. And this had some of those elements too, where, at one point there's a creature that appears, and it just looks super fucking silly. It looks really, really silly. Okay. So there's a lot of silly, colorful things going on, but then again, not enough of them, not anywhere near at the level of an Avatar, that just, is a whole world that insists upon itself. This is a thing where you're sort of like, is this it? Like, you're sort of waiting for it to like come really happen. And then it's like, well, that's the end of that scene. We're on to the next thing. It's like, no, this is it. This is as good as it's going to get for this. Like, this isn't really going to be this blow your mind visual movie. And it's tough. It's tough to be making a movie that people might expect to be that way nowadays, because after you see Doctor Strange, after you see, what the hell is the name of the movie? The last movie by Luc Besson, right? The French comic book space movie, right? I can't remember the name of it. But that movie was terrible. But visually speaking, it was kind of amazing, like just how just how much that guy was doing with just crazy amounts of CGI. So so I think that that's a big weakness of the movie, right? And if we are gonna, instead of blaming the budget, because I don't know what the budget is. Again, first impressions, right? So I just saw the movie. I sort of come into this with almost no research. I just hope I can remember all these names, but I literally had to look this stuff up before. Ava DuVernay, right, is the director. Okay, and most recently she directed Selma, which I actually haven't seen, so I have nothing to say good or bad about that. But that was a celebrated film, and I think a lot of people felt like it was underappreciated and that she was underappreciated. I do appreciate the fact that she followed that up by making a documentary, and then she followed that up by making this crazy stuff, right? So she's kind of, I like this trajectory that she's on a lot, right? As a director, I'm into this, man. She's just like sort of bobbing and weaving and doing things she wants to do, taking advantage of the opportunities she can find when she can find them, and there's something kind of fearless about that, and I think that's always important, and that will always lead to good art, right? It will always lead to good art. So if she can keep going and she can keep doing, finding opportunities and fearlessly going into these different things the way she does, I feel very confident that she's onto something with her directing, right? That said, I did see 13th, okay, and 13th is about the 13th Amendment, right? So it's about the essentially the loophole in the 13th Amendment that allows corporations to hire incarcerated prisoners as labor, right? And how that basically creates essentially a new slave class out of the old slave class, because most of the people in who are employed in jail are African Americans. So important subject, important movie, and for me, an overrated movie because of some of the writing I do. I've written for a street paper in Nashville for years. And a street newspaper is a newspaper that's sold by homeless people, right? So I've written a lot about homeless populations, veterans issues, what else? Public health, the cradle to prison pipeline, which is sort of a whole idea of how even from a young age, young black boys are set up essentially to be funneled into jail basically as they get older. And some would argue that's because they need people to work for nothing for corporations, right? That employ these prisoners. So there's a need for a workforce, that doesn't have to be paid. Pretty brutal, right? So it's a good movie, and if you haven't seen it, and if you don't know a lot about those things I'm talking about, then it's definitely very informative documentary that I would say is must see documentary. But that said, I know all about that, and I know people in Nashville who are experts on that, who every week on Facebook I'm being updated on exactly what the prison situation is here right in Nashville, and we still have a death penalty in Tennessee, and so that's a big issue here. So all this stuff is stuff that I'm very familiar with. So the documentary, wasn't illuminating particularly to me in terms of the subject matter. But the thing that always made me feel like it was a bit overrated, what I think people are doing is they're sort of blown away by this, by being illuminated by this information. They then say, oh, it's a great documentary, right? I do think it's an important documentary, but it's not a great documentary. And the subject, in a way, to me, is not what a documentary, the documentary is evoking the subject. And maybe they're doing a good job of explaining something that a lot of people need to be explained to them, and that's important work for sure. In this case, for sure. But because I was already pretty familiar with it, I was kind of stuck on the fact that the movie essentially is just talking heads, basically. There's really nothing unique about the way she's going about the film, right? And to me, even in a documentary, that's where the filmmaking takes place. You know what I mean? the story of this law and the way these people are taking advantage of it. That's just reality. You're not writing that, you're not creating that, you know what I mean? You're just going out there and getting that, and it's the getting of that and then the assembling of that where the filmmaking takes place. And if you're choosing to just interview people on camera and then put it all together, for me, it's not, that just doesn't work for me. It's not enough for me to get very excited about a movie that I already am very well versed in terms of the information you're giving me in this documentary. So I was always, skeptical about people's, really positive reviews of that. I almost want to say 13th was nominated for an Academy Award. And again, I think it's a thing where it's like, it's an important subject, but that doesn't mean it's an important film or a great film. So here's my question is, I wonder to what degree the failings here are due to that same thing, where you're finding a limit in terms of how much you're willing to imagine your way through finding new solutions, not being just satisfied to find the solution, but find a new solution. Don't just make a well-organized documentary about an important subject. Make a fucking mind-blowing documentary about an important subject. Catch me by surprise. Do something is there something somebody hasn't done with a documentary yet? There's lots of documentaries out there today. It's like more important than ever to be, capable of doing something unique and interesting with that form. And I also think that in this movie, maybe there's something going on there too. It's like, did she create another world and, with all this variety and strangeness? Yeah, more or less. Sure she did, but it wasn't Star Wars, man. You know what I mean? It wasn't Blade Runner. It wasn't, it wasn't anything, again, it wasn't anything that really let me believe that it was there. You know what I mean? Really let go and believe in it, I think even Doctor Strange was better at that. Doctor Strange, I think was more convincing. You know what I mean? And when it's more convincing, again, then I can just relax and believe the things happening. And now I can pay attention to the story and the characters and what's happening with them, because I'm already convinced of all of this stuff. I'm not sitting here going like, come on, really? And then the characters are talking and I'm missing it. So that said, there wasn't that much of that. Generally speaking, I did enjoy the movie. For me, I would say like a B. I'd say like a B. Sure, I'd give it a B, I would say, if you're, a man and you're in your 40s, I would say you might say, hey, it's a B, it's a B. Because there's a lot to like, for sure. There's a lot to like, for sure. And I don't want to, narrow down too deeply into the things that I wasn't into about it. And I also want to say, to make two more points about the fact that it's important to note that it's like, I do think ultimately this movie is a movie for 9-year-old girls, right? And I am not a 9-year-old girl and have no idea what a 9-year-old girl, might not like or not like. But my instinct is that a whole lot of this nitpicky stuff that I'm getting so worked up about, most 9-year-old girls aren't going to be paying any attention to that stuff, And I think it's important to remember that it's not okay to say, oh, it's okay that it's bad because it's for kids. You know what I mean? I don't feel comfortable with that, but there is some truth to the fact that, that there's a lot of programming for children that simply, it's just not made for an adult. It's just not for adults. It's for kids, and we always get amazed by those works of art that are like, like the kids movie that speaks to the adult, the kids book that an adult can read and enjoy on a whole other level, that kind of thing. Right. And I do think that's a special kind of masterpiece, and that's a special kind of achievement when we get a book like that, or when we get a movie like that. But it is the exception to the rule. And I think this is a movie that, young kids, young boys too, would like this a lot. So I think for kids, it might be a really big film. I did like the fact that it was sort of, it was realistic, and it was, there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good, warm sort of friendship and family messages in it, but it never comes off as like hokey or like, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't come off as like, cheesy or anything like that in that regard. Sentimental, too much, not too much. For the most part, it's you believe in these relationships with these folks, and it's a pretty good movie, and they do a pretty good job too of sort of getting into the head of I guess the girl is supposed to be like about middle school age, I would say. So it's that's a really crazy time, and I think they do a pretty good job of kind of evoking a realistic sort of portrait of a girl who's like who's got a lot. It's got a whole lot of stuff on her plate, and she's trying to grow up in the meantime, and it's not easy. And I think she does a very good job of the performance. So great lead performance. Cool supporting actors like Oprah knocking it out of the park again, like usual. A great cameo by Zach Galifianakis, very good. Moments of dramatic acting that he handles pretty well, and funny moments that he just slams, and he's a cool surprise. I think I did know that he was going to be in this movie, but I'd completely forgotten. And by the time he makes his entrance, I was excited to see him, and he was very good. He did a very good job. So that was fun. And like I said, there's some pretty good acting, some sloppy scripting, and the damage that causes. And I think ultimately too, I want to see Ava DuVernay get a hold of a project that she can, sort of really really let loose on, because I think there's so much daring in her career choices. On some level, I don't feel like I've seen that daring yet in her actual filmmaking. So maybe we'll see that the next time. But I see that I've been on for just a little over half an hour, so that feels like plenty. That feels like plenty of talking about this movie. So I hope you guys enjoy this one as much as the Black Panther review that I did. Please leave comments again. That was really fun to have a discussion about that movie, and I'd love to talk more about this one. Enjoy the movie this weekend, and let me know what you think. Thanks, everybody.